Hello, everybody. This is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Part 1, Chapter 24. Yes, there must be something repulsive about me, thought Levin as he left the Sherbatskys and went in search of his brother. I'm not popular with men. I say it as pride. No, I'm not proud. If I had been proud, I should not have put myself in my present situation. And he imagined himself to be a happy, popular, calm, witty Vronsky, with strength enough to avoid such a terrible position as he had put himself into on that evening. Yes, she naturally chose him, and I have no right to complain about any one or anything. I am the only person to blame. What right had I to think that she would unite her life with mine? Who am I? And what am I? A man useful to no one, a good-for-nothing. Then the memory of his brother Nikolai came back to his... Was he not right in saying that everything in this world was miserable and wretched? Have we been just in our judgment of our brother Nikolai? Of course, in the eyes of Prokofy, who saw him drunk in ragged clothes, he is a miserable creature. But I judge him differently. I know his heart, and I know that we are alike. And I, instead of going to find him, have been out dining, and to this party. Levin read his brother's address in the light of the street lamp, and called an izvoshchik, while on the way he recalled one by one the incidents of Nikolai's life. He remembered how at the university, and for a year after his graduation, he had lived like a monk, notwithstanding the ridicule of his comrades, strictly devoted to all the forms of religion, services, fasts, turning his back on all pleasures, especially women, and then how he had suddenly turned around and fallen into the company of people of the lowest lives, and entered upon a course of dissipation and debauchery. He remembered his conduct towards a lad whom he had taken from the country to bring up, and whom he whipped so severely in a fit of anger that he narrowly escaped being transported for mayhem. He remembered his conduct towards a swindler, whom he had given a bill of exchange in payment of a gambling debt, and whom he had caused to be arrested. This was, in fact, the bill of exchange which Sergei Ivanovitch had just paid. He remembered the night spent by Nikolai at the station-house on account of a spree, a scandalous lawsuit against his brother Sergei Ivanovitch, because the latter had refused to pay his share of their maternal inheritance. And finally he recalled his last adventure, when, having taken a position in one of the Western governments, was dismissed for assaulting a superior. All this was detestable, but the impression on Levin was less odious than it would be on those who did not know Nikolai, did not know his history, did not know his heart. Levin did not forget how, at the time that Nikolai was seeking to curb the evil passions of his nature by devotions, fasting, prayers, and other religious observances, no one had approved of it or aided him, but how, on the contrary, everyone, even himself, had turned it into ridicule. They had mocked him, nicknamed him Noah, the monk. Then, when he had fallen, no one had helped him, but all had fled from him in horror and disgust. Levin felt that his brother Nikolai, at the bottom of his heart, in spite of all the deformity of his life, could not be so much worse than those who despised him. "I'll go and find him, and tell him everything, and show him that I love him, and think about him," said Levin to himself, and about 11 o'clock in the evening he bade the driver take him to the hotel indicated on the address. "Upstairs, numbered 12 and 13, said the Swiss in reply to Levin's question. "Is he at home?" "Probably." The door of number 12 was ajar. From the room came the dense fumes of inferior tobacco. Levin heard an unknown voice speaking, then he recognized his brother's presence by his cough. When he entered the door, he heard the unknown voice saying, "All depends upon whether the affair is conducted in a proper and rational manner." Constantin Levin glanced through the doorway and saw that the speaker was a young man, clad like a peasant and with an enormous shapka on his head. On the sofa was sitting a young woman with a pockmarked face and dressed in a woolen gown without collar or cuffs. Constantin's heart sank to think of the strange people with whom his brother was associated. No one heard him, and while he was removing his galoshes, he listened to what the man in the doublet said. He was speaking of some enterprise under consideration. The devil take the privileged classes, said his brother's voice after a fit of coughing. Masha, see if you can't get us something to eat, and bring some wine if there's any left. If not, go for some. The woman arose, and as she came out of the inner room, she saw Constantine. The gentleman is here, Nikolai Dmitrich, she cried. What is wanted? Said the voice of Nikolai Levin angrily. It's I, replied Constantine, appearing at the door. Who is I? Repeated Nikolai's voice, still more angrily. A sound of someone quickly rising and stumbling against something. Then Constantine saw his brother standing before him at the door, infirm, tall, thin, bent, with great startled eyes. He was still thinner than when Constantine last saw him 3 years before. He wore a short overcoat. His hands and his bony frame seemed to him more colossal than ever. His hair was cut close, his mustaches stood out straight from his lips, and his eyes glared at his visitor with a strange, uncanny light. "Ah, Kostya!" he cried, suddenly recognizing his brother, and his eyes shone with joy. But in an instant he turned towards his brother, and only made a quick, convulsive motion of his head and neck, as though his cravat choked him, a gesture well known to Constantine, and at the same time an entirely different gesture, savage and cruel, swept over his pinched features. I wrote both to you and Sergei Ivanovitch, and I do not know you, nor wish to know you. What do you want? He was not at all such as Constantine had imagined him. The hard and wild elements of his character, which made him family relationship difficult, had faded from Constantine Levin's memory whenever he thought about him. And now, when he saw his face and the characteristic convulsive motions of his head, he remembered it. I wanted nothing of you except to see you, he replied a little timidly. I only came to see you. His brother's diffidence apparently disarmed Nikolai. Ah, did you? Said he. Come in, sit down. Do you want some supper? Masha, bring enough for 3. No, hold on. Do you know who this is? He asked, pointing to the young man in the doublet. This gentleman is Mr. Kritsky, a friend of mine from Kiev, a very remarkable man. It seems the police are after him because he is not a coward. And he looked, and as he always did after speaking, at all who were in the room. Then seeing that the woman who stood at the door was about to leave, he shouted, Wait, I tell you. Then, with his blundering, ignorant mode of speech, which Constantine knew so well, he began to narrate the whole story of Kritsky's life, how he had been driven from the university because he tried to found an aid society and Sunday schools among the students, how afterwards he had been appointed teacher in a primary school, only to be dismissed, and how finally they had tried him for something or other. Were you at the University of Kiev? Asked Constantine of Kritsky, in order to break the awkward silence. Yes, at Kiev, replied Kritsky curtly with a frown. And this woman, cried Nikolai Levin with a gesture, is the companion of my life, Marya Nikolaevna. I found her, he said, shrugging his shoulders. But I love her, and I esteem her, and all who want to know me must love her and esteem her. She's just the same as my wife, just the same. Thus you know with whom you have to do, and if you think that you lower yourself, there's the door. And again his questioning eyes looked about the room. I do not understand how I should lower myself. All right, Masha, bring us up enough for 3, some vodka and wine. No, wait, no matter, though. Go.